Today's podcast is sponsored by TeamBuilder. You can get a free trial of their training portal software by heading to teambuilder.com, and you can use the code JUSTFLY for a 30-day free trial. Sign up today with TeamBuilder and see what they can do for you for your training programs and your team. If you're in the world of sports performance, you've probably heard of jump testing mats. These mats use hang time to measure total jump height or contact time to measure quickness abilities off of the ground. The best jump mat that I've come across also happens to be a sponsor of this show, which is the Plyomat. The Plyomat is not only accurate, easy to use, and affordable, but it also allows you to string multiple mats together to add an extra dynamic to plyometric testing and training. To check out the Plyomat, you can head to plyomat.net. That's plyomat.net. Welcome to another episode of the podcast, and thanks for tuning in. I'm excited to welcome to the show Romain Tourillon. He is a researcher, a physiotherapist, and an educator who has an emphasis of work on the foot and ankle complex, and he studies it for both rehab conditions and athletic performance. Romain's currently finishing up a PhD on the foot muscles and their role in sports performance, and that PhD is supervised by none other than sprint researcher JB Morin, who has been a multi-time guest on this podcast. Romain works as a clinician at Latour Hospital as part of the Swiss Olympic Medical Center. For the show today, he'll be getting into aspects of the forefoot, or think about the balls of the feet, the toes, the front metatarsals, and then the midfoot, so think the middle arches, that bridge section of the foot, and what each of those components of the foot do in terms of athletic movement, and then how we can train them. He'll also get into a lot of great information on the toes and different manipulations of the foot in basic training situations to help not only athletes be more robust to injury, but also to link to specific components of absorbing force or propulsion. So it was really great talking to Romain on the episode, or for the show today. One last thing, quick definition, raise, and there's probably a few other words or definitions I may have missed, but Romain mentions raise, which is just like first ray is the first toe or big toe, fifth ray is the fifth toe or pinky toe, so on and so forth. This was a fantastic conversation, and there are a lot of nuggets within this talk. So let's get on to episode 395 here with Romain Tourillon. Romain, welcome to the show. It's fantastic to have you here. It's been a while since I did an episode on the foot. And the first question I have for you is, what got you interested in training the foot, the lower leg, that component of the body as it pertains to rehab and performance?
Yeah, first of all, thank Joel for the invitation. It's a pleasure too. It's a short question, but it could be a long answer. I would say as three arguments. Number one is that my mentor when I did my master thesis was really a foot ankle lover, a foot ankle expert. So I really worked closely with him, and I would say I found love in this complex, because also it will be my number two, because when you look at epidemiologically, you have a economical burden of foot ankle injury, and if we just I would say speak about lateral ankle sprain and chronic ankle instability, you are really a cognitive burden, maybe some long-term impairments. But what is funny with that is that people don't care about rolling their foot and ankle or sprain their ankle. So I was at that time also very surprised about that. And also when I look at the research in comparison to other joints, you have your massive research on the shoulder and the knee, not very much on the foot and ankle, and not very much on the performance sport. But if you look at just on the rehab side, and so I start also to work and spoke with foot ankle expert and research, and try to, I would say, know what could be missing. And one of the big missing part was maybe in the performance side. And on the performance side, we knew, but that the foot and ankle is important in lower limb function. We know that the calf, and we will discuss it later, it's pretty very important, but really the foot muscle, extrinsic and intrinsic, could be an issue. So I start to do some research to, I would say, put my role on that, and yeah, that's it. And but yeah, we are the first to investigate this kind of research. But yeah, it's cool. It's just the beginning of the foot, I would say, of what we know and what we will know about foot muscle and strength and performance and so on.
Yeah, you mentioned the lack of research there. And I was just thinking to myself, I know when I was doing a lot of biomechanics work, I was in the biomechanics lab a lot when I was in graduate school. And the person who ran the lab, Tom Kernozik was his name, he did a lot of ACL knee research, like ACL tears and things. And there is so much out there, I'm sure, for ACL prevention, and rightly so. It's a big deal. Like you said, economic impact. The economic impact of people tearing their ACL and their knee is substantial, but there's certainly a massive amount of foot and lower leg and ankle elements as well. I would think there's probably almost like, who knows, like 5 or 10 studies for a knee injury for every one on the foot or ankle. I mean, I don't know the ratio, but I'm sure it's probably close to that.
Yeah, definitely. And but I'm really like, investigating the lower limb as an holistic approach, and seeing the composition between, having foot ankle impairments that could lead to, I would say, an increase or an increased loading in the hip or in the knee joint, or when you have foot ankle impairments that leading to not able to totally perform force production within your hip or your extensor and so on. But it's not always a bottoms-up approach. It could be also the reverse, a top-down approach, and the hip impairments of the trunk that could allow the foot to don't have, I would say, good function on the ground. So that's why when you say ACL, you can also speak about foot in the ACL, like the trunk in the ACL. It's like, I would say, as a practitioner, sport physio, I'm now working only with the limb injury. So I really, I will say, create this kind of holistic approach in terms of hip, knee, ankle, and foot now. So the foot is what maybe I had in some, I will say, discussion on some assessment and some rehab plan and protocol. But it's not saying that the hip is better than the foot is better than the hip. Yeah. It's not that. It's that everything is here. Everything could be important. That's dependent on some parameter. But
yeah, that's one thing. I think it was about probably 6 years ago. I was started to really get into more of the foot. I mean, I guess I've always have been, but especially with some of the podcast episodes very early ago on this podcast. And it was almost like a mind blown moment hearing about a little over 5 years ago, hearing about top down influences where, like you just said, where it's like the thorax, the rib cage, the pelvis, the forces coming down from the top are going to have an impact on the feet as well. And to realize that there's nothing that's truly in isolation. Although I think there's isolation exercises can certainly help. But it is interesting to also look at that as a connected piece there.
Say that, the lower limb has to absorb and propulse force. And so, it's you say it's not just the foot does that, or not just the hip. And so that's why we have this. You have to have this holistic approach and this link between both and every joint here.
Yeah, with the feet, before we got too far into some of the other questions, I did want to ask you, just because this is interesting to me just philosophically, and I believe you've written about this, is the difference between the feet and the hands. And I know I've worked with coaches here in the United States, the Marinovich training system. One of their big proponents was, well, training barefoot, but training things of the feet and the hands from a sensory perspective. So they would do a lot of their jumps and their machine work barefoot and balance work barefoot. And they also did a lot of like hand work barefoot, like flicking the hands, flicking the wrists. And I think that's great, but it's also interesting to think about the fundamental differences between the feet meant to support the body and the hands having a little bit more of that grasping type function. And anyways, I wanted to get your take on that because I think it can be more insight to the foot by understanding the job of each and how to train them accordingly.
Yeah. It's I like to ask the question when I look at or maybe all the exercise that we can give to the foot when you look at the research on or social media and so on, and say, do we want and it's instead of feet, just because, as you say, that the function of the foot, it's to support body weight during stance phase and propulse the body. So the force within the foot is pretty huge, and the foot has evolved from billion years ago from that. And because of this bipedal locomotion, we have really, I will say, a great changement of foot muscle on their neurophysiological physiological parameters. And what we know from the foot muscle is that they don't have the neurophysiological parameters to have fine precision control, low grade of force output, like you can have with your finger. And when I'm in Congress or in private courses, I have two video, a sprinter with very slow motion of the foot interact with the ground, and on the other end, I have just me playing piano in a bar in Paris, and say neurophysiologically, my hands muscle have a low volume or low cross-sectional area in comparison to the number of motor units. And at reverse, my foot muscle, I don't have many motor units in comparison to the volume that they have. They have also small fiber lengths in comparison to the cross-sectional area. So they are much more, I will say, they have much more role in force production or sustained prolonged force in comparison to have coordination. That's why when I look at tooth coordination, to spread out and so on, try to elevate your hallux and so on. For me, that's far away from what the foot can do in, I would say, in real life, and it's maybe not biomechanically and neurophysiologically linked to the foot function. That's why I say that you will have to work properly on what the foot does. What the foot does is, have dorsiflexion and flexion on the MTP joint, have pronation and supination, also on the midfoot and on the rear foot. And after you have also the plantar flexion and so on. But that's this kind of action within the foot. It's not, hallux extension and to spread of hallux abduction. You don't have this when you're sprinting, cutting, or jumping. Yeah. So that's why I think we have to have this distinction between feet and hands. But yeah, for sure, barefoot and improving the sensory, I will say, output and work on that in the foot. It's pretty important. If we have one that we know that is their major role for the intrinsic foot muscle, it's not maybe the biomechanics and the energetic within the foot, but it's pretty that they are really the greatest role have a proprioceptive input
Yeah.
within the foot, and we know that, and we will discuss this later. But yeah, maybe one of the greatest role of the intrinsic within the foot is just that. So we know that barefoot plantar massage, electrical stimulation, like I did on my master thesis, a way to improve this function. And we know that after the the output could be better. But yeah, I think that it's just the distinction and a statement about what does the intrinsic foot muscle and what they don't.
Yeah. So you're saying like the intrinsic foot, a huge part of that is maybe this is my perception of it, is I find for proprioception or like balance based exercises, it's a good sign when people are feeling that in the intrinsic foot muscle. I find people who do balance exercises and don't feel it in their foot, they feel it in like their calf. Usually those are people with issues. They think there's a strong link there.
Yeah, I like when you do postural balance tests. One of the major thing that you have to look at how they interact with the ground. When I say how they interact, it's looking at how they feel the ground and how they try to stabilize their foot on the ground. And you see some people that don't have action with the toes, don't have I will say force production within the foot during postural balance. And there is some interesting research saying that and demonstrated that you have a neurophysiologic link between the forefoot and the rear foot. And when you are able to, I will say, have the toes, keep the toes on the ground, keep your first ray on the ground, you reduce the ability, or you reduce the motion of the rear foot to doing eversion, like an ankle sprain. And in reverse, when you have your twos and fifths, I will say, strong on the ground, you reduce also the motion of the rear foot, but much more in pronation. So that's pretty interesting, and that's also a foundation. Also in postural balance is the ability to counteract, the instability by keeping your foot on the ground and keeping your toes on the ground and by performing that, reducing the motion on the rear foot, that's an important part. Could be in static postural balance and in dynamic, to have this I will say direct interaction when you touch the ground to try to stabilize and grab and grab the ground. Yeah.
Yeah. Quickly, I didn't have that on the question list, but I do want to quickly ask you this, and then we'll get into a little bit more of the foot strength and impulse power type things. Actually, I have just a couple questions, follow-ups. One, and then the second one will have to do with the toe gripping, and I'll get back to that. But you mentioned that the feet don't have the sensory ability of the hands. And I think I watch athletes a lot, and I'm always intrigued. I've talked about other coaches like Adarian Barr and John Garish on this podcast. We've talked about like athletes who make different positions with their hands when they're doing different skills. Like when an athlete's going to jump, sometimes you'll see them make like a symbol with their hand. Like they might stick their pinky finger out more. It's almost as if the hand is trying to use its fine control to influence the shape of the foot that doesn't have like quite the neurological level or something like that. And I find that interesting. But what I was going to say was, I know like toe yoga type things are popular. Like, hey, lift your big toe, keep your little toes down, push your big toe down, lift your little toes up, and those types of things. Based off of like the function of the foot and the sensory nature and things like that, you could think even you could take that all the way to Harry Houdini, the escape artist who could pick locks with his toes. I mean, you could say, well, how useful is that? Is that beyond the use of any athletic performance on the ground, right? But what's your take on the toe yoga type thing, like the different manipulation of the toes as it pertains to injury prevention, performance, and those types of pieces?
Well, I think that for strength, to increase the strength, or to have, I will say, target this function, I think that's not the best exercise, because it's, as I said before, it's fine precision control, coordination, and when you give this kind of exercise and say that you want to strengthen the toes or the foot, that's not the best thing, I think. Number one is because there are many athletes that struggle with that, and you can take many sessions to try to learn, and they don't, I will say, able to perform this task, because also that we know that there are some, I would say, between, that's depend on the study, but approximately 70% of participants in a study are not able to have a total, I will say, activation of the abductoralis, so it's the bigger intrinsic foot muscle, during a flexion of the toes. So we know that there are also some inhibition in this muscle. So yoga for strength, I think it's not the best way. But when I say before, for postural thing, and that they understand that they have to keep their foot on the ground, their forefoot, their toes on the ground, and sometimes when you are, a rear foot inversion, you have maybe some extension of the hallux or a detachment of the first ray, so you have to have a flexion of the toes and the fifths to control that, and so on. So I will say to yoga could be some movement that you can have in postural balance task. So I would say that maybe for that. But yeah, in terms of strength gain and athletic performance and so on, I don't think that's a big deal or a great role. And if we look at injury prevention, we know that in some foot ankle injury, atrophy of the foot muscle is a risk factor.
Mm-hmm.
And as I say to you, I don't think that you will create lots of hypertrophy within the intrinsic foot muscle or within the foot muscle in doing that, because it's far from resistance training principle or hypertrophy principle. And we know that the foot has this, what I call the load fine-tuning.
Yeah.
The load fine-tuning within the foot is if we are in a sitting position or just in a standing position with your 2 feet, you don't have much more activation within the foot. And we know that when you are in one leg, that's better, that's really better. But when you increase after your body weight and you increase your speed within your body, for like jumping, amping, and so on, you will have, I will say, greatest activation, far from greatest activation. So that's why I say that we are far away, because seeing this man doing his 2 yoga exercise in on his chair, just in sitting position and so on, that's not help him anymore.
Yeah.
If you have an athlete struggling with doing some 2 yoga and so on, if you increase his body weight, you will help him because of this load fine-tuning. Believe me, if you just put, I don't know, a bar squat on his shoulder and try, or be on one leg and try to do it, will be, I will say, much more easier for him because of this increased unconscious activation of the foot, or because of this fine-tuning, load fine-tuning.
So are you saying that the load and the force, compared to like a toe yoga type thing, we're just manipulating the toes, you're saying that the force production of the foot is far more important, like just the more strength oriented, foot on the ground, upright standing motions are where the highest transfer gains are going to be relative to sitting and doing like different toe manipulations.
Yeah, because also the two yoga or short foot, I would say it's a force production are short lengths. also within if we just look at the extrinsic toe flexor or intrinsic foot muscle, it's really low force production have low, I would say, have short lengths. So in terms of strength gain, yeah, that's not better. And I will say the last study that saying that you have greatest activation while just doing heel raises on the intrinsic foot muscle in comparison to specific exercise like hallux extension to spread out a short foot and so on. This study of Williamson. And why a heel raise could increase the intrinsic foot muscle activities, also because you have an anteriorization, of the center of pressure that could increase the activity. You have a dorsiflexion of the toes when you have a much more, force length. You have much more focus on the force length relationship, much more at the an optimal force production also. And for some people that have calf weaknesses, maybe, I don't know in the study, but maybe we know that, performing, I would say, force production of positive work within the foot during heel raises because the calf is weaker. We see this in many people also.
So you're saying that with just the calf raise or the heel raise, the basic exercise everybody knows. So just doing like a single leg heel raise or calf raise gives you also good like intrinsic foot muscle activation, and that's because like the toes are dorsiflexing relatively when you do that. I was trying to reconfirm what you were saying there.
Yeah, that's it. And I would say it's funny because one of the best, if is the best researcher regarding intrinsic foot muscle and foot biomechanics, Luke Kelly from Australia, Queensland Griffith University now, but say that he hates the short foot and said that he really like the heel raise, for example, to I would say train the intrinsic foot muscle. And that's why I like to manipulate the amount of dorsiflexion.
Yeah, with the toes, right? Like
with the toe, because when you increase the dorsiflexion, for example, during the heel raises, you increase the midfoot moment and midfoot force production. So I will say it's much more difficult, and it's funny to combine this. So doing heel raises on the floor and doing heel raises on an incline plate or with the dorsiflexion, and you will see maybe some people struggling when you have an incline plate. That's mean that maybe their forefoot and midfoot or maybe a link or things to work on, because I would say increase the force that you have to produce within the midfoot when you're doing this. So that's should be I would say one good exercise, or when you want to do calf and foot in propulsion exercise. That's cool for the what I call the propulsing foot. That's a cool exercise, for example.
There's just something powerful and unique about a supplement that smells and tastes like something you would find out in the woods, yet can improve your strength, energy, and overall vitality. I've been using herbs from today's sponsor, Lost Empire Herbs, regularly for over 5 years now. Ever since I started using them, the Phoenix formula is where I started at. I've noticed a strength boost, I've noticed a decreased reliance on caffeine, and it's been a consistent part of my supplementation cabinet ever since. To jumpstart the power of nature in your own supplementation, backed by a 365-day money-back guarantee, you can grab 15% off of my favorite Lost Empire Herbs products, such as the Phoenix Formula, Shilajit Resin, mushroom tinctures, and more. And to do that, you can go to lostempireherbs.com/justfly, and you can use the code Joel15, again, for 15% off of your order. Head to Lost Empire Herbs today and start harnessing the power of nature in your supplementation. Yeah. I like hearing those anecdotes because I think sometimes we're made to think that, like with the short foot, like this is the ultimate intrinsic foot activation exercise or something. But in reality, the simple thing, the single leg calf raise that everyone does, it gives you that intrinsic foot already. It's kind of funny. Like even this program, a couple of things is one, I remember the first jump training program I ever did was something called Air Alert. That was when I was probably 14. And it's just like do like 50 squat jumps. It got up to absurdly high numbers. But the second exercise was just single leg calf raises on a stair. And I found that was for at least the first few phases of the program before the numbers got too high. It was really helpful. And even I've seen research on ballet. It was something like foot and ankle injuries in ballet dancers. And the number one test, or a very simple test just to determine foot injury rates, was can you do 25 single leg heel raises? That was it. It's like just so simple, But then you were saying with I love simple things that have just a very basic, simple tweak. Like you said, elevating the toes. And now you can manipulate that. And it makes me think, I'll have to put this in the show notes, is Kadour Ziani, who is a French-Algerian like basketball dunker like athlete. Who's known for all sorts of interesting eccentric training and is really into the foot and like the elastic qualities of the body. And there was I saw this somewhere. It was like a Ziani, I think it was a calf raise or something, or maybe it was like a single leg squat, but it was a calf raise on like a slant board, like with the toes in more dorsiflexion, or maybe it was some sort of single leg squat variation with the toes in more dorsiflexion. But that guy is so intuitive. Like he's a guy who strikes me. I've never met him, but who really feels everything going through the foot. And so that's just such a simple, easy way to get, that activation.
For sure. And if we compare heel raise and short foot, everybody say that heel raise it's much more functional. Because when you push in the ground, you do a heel raise. It could be vertical, mediolateral, or horizontal, and so you can have this kind of exercise, manipulate the toes, and also at the reverse, if you put the toes in flexion, or if you don't put the toe outside the floor. So, for example, you do a heel raises, but without your toes on the floor. It's also, you will reduce also the force that you have to produce within the foot. So it's greater to use this when maybe you have pain during heel raises for some. I really like this exercise because they say, okay, when I have my toes on the ground, I have pain when I do heel raises, and when I don't have my finger on the floor, but I do heel raises without, interaction on the toes, I don't have pain. So cool. I can walk on this calf without struggling with pain heel raises. So that's a good point. And at at the reverse, as I said to you, when you increase the dorsiflexion, you increase the force production within the foot. So that's this kind of exercise. You can add what also we work during this thesis in the foot strength protocol is add electrical stimulation during, heel raise protocol, or just perform MTP joint flexion, so max MTP joint flexion just before the elevation of the heel. So you can manipulate this. So just forefoot, I will say MVC action, or forefoot MVC plus heel raises, and the toes are really the toes angulation are really the target that you can change during the exercise if you want to increase the role of the midfoot and forefoot, or if you want to decrease the role because of pain, or if you want really to target the calf without the foot, for example,
Yeah. Thinking about the dorsiflexion or the toes up calf work, it makes me think too, in all other exercises in the body, we encourage doing at least something with a full range of motion. So maybe you do spend some time doing half squats, but at least take the time to do a few deep squats and get the full range out of it, or a full range lunge or whatever. And I don't think we think about the foot that way. It's easy not to. It's like, hey, just elevate the toes and it's going to help you get that. It's like a deep squat for the foot kind of type thing.
Yeah, totally. And because the MTP joint regulate also, the strain in the plantar fascia and so on. And we know that the regulation of the strain within the foot on the plantar fascia, it's also the contribution. It's, I will say from a decade ago, all of the credit was thanks to the windlass mechanism. And since 5 years, so the study of Ferris and after Rowan Welty show that, this stiffness regulation of the foot on the plantar fascia, it's much more active contribution, from the extrinsic plexo and intrinsic and on the calf on this way. So totally agree that the range of motion of the two and as you said, total amplitude could be also good for the foot. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I'll have to put, and I'm sure we'll talk about this a little bit too, but I've seen videos of you doing like calf work with that little toe ramp. So I'll have to put something like that in the show notes along with the Cadorziani exercises if I can find them wherever they are. It'll be interesting to compare those.
I created also some or incline plate. So when you have an incline plate height, I would say between 20 and 30 degrees, that's pretty cool.
No, incline plate.
Incline plate,
yes, yeah. At first, it sounded like inkling. I wasn't sure. That makes perfect sense.
Sorry, that's my French accent. And I create also a plate with a hole. When I want just to do heel raises, but with just the first ray.
Only the big toe. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
You can also create this kind of plate when you want, for some. Maybe I would say I'm lucky here to have plantar pressure measurement, so I can really know how the force is distributed below the foot so it's on a treadmill, instrumented treadmill, so it's just linear. I know it's just running, but you can do also sprinting, but that's cool. But all the force is distributed below the foot. And I could see some propulsion, with the lateral part of the foot and not on the first ray. But that's what also I created this kind of plate in order to do some calf raise with just a focus on the first ray force application, because they don't have their toes touching the ground. The 2 and the 5th, they have just the first on the plate. So it's pretty hard exercise there for sure, but it's pretty good exercise in order to, I say, work on this propulsion on the first ray on the big toe. That it's much more economic. It's you can produce greatest force production, and it's better for everything to have this, what I say, good propulsion. I would say good propulsion picture or good propulsion function, pushing on the first toe.
Yeah, the propulsion. With the big toe, it is interesting. I'm trying to think back to even it was Cadorziani, and I want to say his big toe. There was a picture of his big toe where the nail was like the toenail of the big toe was like getting like black or something because it was so far up in the shoe. Like it's almost like I've seen this. There's a slow motion of Geber Selassie, the marathon runner's foot coming down barefoot, and the big toe is cranked upward. And it's almost like these elite athletes they're just always like that. It's like, oh yeah, that's just what my foot should be in space. And I remember when I was back at UC Berkeley, I worked with track and I also worked with swimming and some other sports, but it was just funny because you would think swimmers would have the most flippery like feet, and the good ones actually do. Like the good ones' feet are so much like a flipper, they're actually not fantastic for force production on the land. But we had one guy who was incredible at the short course swimming, which is more about the start and the walls than it is. I mean, you have to swim, but having a good start and being powerful and a good jumper helps you in short course. And this guy was like 6'2", 6'3", or 190 meters tall, 190. And he could dunk a basketball 360. And he popped off the ground so easily. I remember the first time I saw him jump, I was like, is this guy a swimmer? Like, this is not right. Like this. And then I saw his shoe one day, and in his shoe, he was busting out the big toe, like was busting out of the shoe. So his big toe was just like flipping up in his shoe. And I was like, I've never seen a swimmer like this ever. This makes, this is really interesting. And he said he did a lot of jump roping when he was in like middle school. He became obsessed with it. Or it was just interesting to see that and make that correlation. So just back to the big toe, you're saying like you have a special ramp that basically just doing like the calf raises and flexions with only the big toe elevated and the other toes sitting downwards, like he flush with the ground or whatever. Like that's the mechanism you're talking about here.
Yeah, it's to, I would say, avoid, but it could be the reverse. It's when you do a heel raise, it's, I will say, avoid that some finger touch the ground, or so you have the first round, the plate, and you have the hole, and so your tooth and the fifth can touch the ground and can perform mechanical task, and you can do the reverse. You can put your first round the hole and perform an heel raises with just your toes and your fifths with your calf.
Okay.
It's to you know what I mean. I can send you some video after the podcast, but
we'll put it in the show notes just for people. If things get lost in translation, I think the video is really helpful with that. I was thinking, like you were saying, like you could do a calf raise and have only your big toe on the ground and the other toe fingers. I'm wiggling my fingers to the camera. The other toes are off, or the big toe is off and the other are on.
Yeah.
Like, kind of like toe yoga, but the
Yeah.
calf raise version, like the loaded version of toe yoga, is kind of what you're saying.
Not maybe to yoga, because it's performing heel raise without say that you have to extend your because they are in the hole. They flex, but they don't interact with the ground. I would say they flex in. So that's it.
Okay, got it. Yeah, I think videos will clear that up for sure. But if nothing else, like I thinking about those toes being in the dorsiflex position, the lengthened position in conjunction with the calf raise is a powerful visual. And then there's different iterations of that. Yeah. So I do want to get into this. This was a big, like, I didn't think we'd get through all the questions, but that's a good thing. So the big, one of the big things I've seen you talk about that I think is really intriguing is the difference between the midfoot and the forefoot in athletic performance, locomotion. Could you tell me a little bit about how you assess, or the importance, maybe start with the importance of forefoot strength and midfoot strength and how those two things show up in athletic movement, and then we'll talk about how to strength train and assess them.
Yeah. I think to start this, we have to understand what is the foot muscle. So for me, there are three groups of foot muscle. They are the calf, because if you look at anatomically, they have the insertion of the calcaneus, so it's bone of the foot. So the calf, it's the first foot muscle. You have the extrinsic foot muscle, and after you have the intrinsic foot muscle. What we know is that the calf, it's the first motor and producer of the energetic within the foot ankle complex. After you have the extrinsic foot muscle, and in this extrinsic foot muscle, you have what I call the midfoot stabilizer. The midfoot stabilizer have the tibialis posterior, tibialis interior. You have also the long fibularis. This is the three muscle, and it's what I call the absorbing foot. Sorry, the absorbing foot is the capacity of the foot to absorb force during, I would say, explosive task or locomotion. So the first thing is to say, okay, the absorbing foot is this muscle, tibialis anterior, tibialis posterior, so the two biggest. And after, if you look at the calf, it's the soleus, which are, I would say, the greatest absorber in the chunk. So we know from this, I would say, clinical reasoning. After that, I say, okay, I will analytically evaluate this muscle. I would say I'm also lucky enough to have also an isokinetic and L dynamometer, force platform, and so on. So I would say that I are able to, I would say, analytically say, okay, your tibialis anterior, so it's dorsiflexion strength testing, inversion strength testing for the tibialis posterior, and after you have the assessment of the soleus. And I have, and it's funny because I read an article this afternoon about bone stress injury in track and field athletes. I remember one of my athletes that have a navicular issue, a navicular stress factor. And when I evaluate this, what I call absorbing foot, so their capacity to absorb the foot, it was funny because they are really, really low level of soleus and tibialis anterior strength with an atrophy, and that for me was the first time that I saw an atrophy of the tibialis anterior. When she did a dorsiflexion of the ankle, you don't see, the muscle bulbing on this tibia. And we talk about an international athlete, that train every day, that trains since it's 5 years, but since 5 years she have some bone stress reaction with I would say pain around the midfoot and so on. And it was funny to say, okay, I know that from an absorption perspective within this foot, I know that the soleus and, for example, tibialis anterior are really the target. So that's for the absorption part. And after we go to the propulsion, what I call the propulsion foot, or and we know that the propulsion, it's much more always the soleus, but much more the gastrocnemius, if you want to evaluate this, or calf raise as we discussed with the knee extended position. And after the MTP joint strength, so the forefoot strength, which is my PhD topic. So the role of the function of the MTP strength in force production. So that's the propulsing foot. And we know how to evaluate the MTP joint strength. You can, for sure do it with an L dynamometer, but now with a force plate, or the force frame also could be a good issue if you have also this. But I would say a force dynamometer to evaluate the force on the MTP joint to produce some force. And you can evaluate also and you have to evaluate also the calf, the gastrocnemius in the extended position. So this is the analytically way to assess the absorption qualities and the propulsion quality. And we know the much more difficult it's how you can, I will say, assess this outside this analytic way. I would say thanks to a force platform, you can have, have a good understanding of the interaction of the foot and ankle on the ground. For example, if you do a pogo jump or 10-5 vertical jump on the force platform, you can have a good understanding of the absorption and the propulsion, I would say, capacity, but from a general overall perspective. I love slow motion. I love seeing my athletes run, cutting, and so on. Looking at how their foot move, of their foot move during ground interaction, and I will say it's always subjective, but with experience, maybe sometime I see always the same thing. We are all biased, but with slow motion and video, you can say, okay, why when he touched the ground, I see that there may be some energy energy transfer that's not good, or you have too much motion, or when he's pushing, you have external rotation of the foot that doesn't allow him, to propel on the first ray and to produce well and so on. So you can after, but much more in subjective and functional, I would say, way to assess this too. But the model now, what we are working on is really absorption, propulsion, and after you have the stage of stretch and shortening circle, the capacity to absorb and propulse from a cyclic perspective. So that's the three concept, and you can add also mobility. But another thing, if you just look at the strengths, it's absorption, propulsion, and after we know that reactive strengths of the foot ankle complex, it's pretty also important, and that's lead to be able to, I would say, be good at absorb force and also propulse force.
Yeah, you mentioned the muscles, the soleus and the gastrocnemius, and hopefully, I guess for people listening, I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with those two muscle groups. But that soleus is the long flat muscle that's kind of deeper in the calf, and the gastrocnemius is like the diamond, the big two like diamond shaped muscles that are more prominent, that I think more people think of when they think of training calves. But one thing this is unofficial, and I can't confirm this, but this is my hunch, is that in watching track and field, it's like the high jumpers, like high jump was one of my main events. And it seems to me like the jumpers and the high jumpers have a little bit more soleus development, and the sprinters are a little bit more, I mean, they have both, but the sprinters are a little bit more gastroc oriented, and I guess it would make sense because the high jumpers have to absorb more, like they have to run in and absorb everything. And you see those soleus just light up in that absorbing phase. It's just like fanning out from the calf. And then, I mean, sprinters have to have good soleus. I mean, like Usain Bolt, if you see like mid-stride, he has good soleus, but it seems like on top of a good soleus for a sprinter, it seems like there is more gastroc a lot of times because it fits with just the constant propulsion. I'm not sure if, again, someone should do a research on this and confirm or deny if this is correct or not. But to me, it's how I tie the two a little bit. It's how I at least could observe jobs, like here's the job of the soleus. It's absorbing this huge collision coming in that initial phase. And then here's the job of the gastroc. It's taking the energy and it's catapulting it into the Achilles as you push off and drive into the next step. And at least that's kind of the way I would see it in terms of looking at body types. And then maybe that would help understanding with, well, what are these doing in different phases of gait and walking or locomotion?
No, but you're right. And that's pretty close which what the science say about these two muscles. The best article, it's the one of Pandy in 2021, and showing that in the lower limb during sprinting acceleration, we know that the soleus are I would say the vertical support of the chain, as you mentioned. So they have the capacity, to absorb and propulse force much more in the vertical orientation. So that's why the jumper or long triple jumper are, as you say, an horizontal orientation for sure of the runner of the jump, but between each jump have to absorb and restitute of the force with the large vertical ground reaction forces. And for the gastrocnemius, it's much more horizontal.
Yeah.
I will say influences in the force production. And when you are in upright posture, in sprinting, we know that in upright posture, that's lead to increase the, I will say, the role of the foot ankle complex in upright posture, because you have less flexion of the lower limb, and you have that this gastrocnemius have to do it this, and you have the energy transfer from the knee to the gastrocnemius because they are biarticular. You have the transfer between the rectus femoris and the gastrocnemius to have this transfer in upright stance phase. So so I would say the research, it's pretty this, and it's what you mentioned about maybe jumper, much more soleus. I would say focus on much more soleus, the development of the soleus, and for sprinter it's much more gastrocnemius. But saying that, if you have a sprinter or if you have maybe a jumper, but you can say that, okay, what is this absorption quality within the foot ankle complex? So I will maybe look at his soleus, I will look at his tibialis anterior, because we know that the dorsiflexor are fundamental in I would say enhancing the role of the Achilles tendon, the preposition of the ankle during the flight time, and have a dorsiflexion. It's pretty fundamental, to have this stretch, of the Achilles before ground contact time, to have this, catapult effect and so on. So from a clinical reasoning, from jumper and his sport, we can say, okay, maybe much more absorption. So maybe we will first work on that, and from a rehab perspective, on even performance perspective, for sure,
Yeah. It makes me think I've seen research that shows that faster sprinting tends to be correlated with also having longer toes. And I think the thought is that in that late stance, it's more mechanically advantageous to have that. And maybe like what we were saying before, the dorsiflexion position, the long position, they can really, in that late stance, get more out of that. And it makes me think too, I wonder if that would fit with more gastrocnemius development, possibly even, because you're also there. Like, it's even more power in the late stance for the gastrocnemius too.
It's the question of the gear ratio, with the long toes, you have, I would say, an increase of the lever arm within the foot, between the ankle joint rotation and the toes. So allowing you to have, if you have the, I would say, calf capacity to have a greatest lever arm to produce force on the ground. So that's, I think it was the study of Japanese or Chinese. I remember this one of the long toes and so on. And that's the same for footwear and carbon plate. We know that carbon plate maybe increase the anteriorization of the force application, so allowing, I will say, have a greatest lever arm for the ankle. But it's just mechanic, because if you don't have the calf, you don't have the calf, and you can have a greatest lever arm and a carbon plate, like you can have longer toe and I will say don't succeed to propulse your body in the right way. So
yeah. So with that, let's get into, we can wrap up with this for the show, because I think it leads nicely into it, is, well, strengthening the late stance and the mid stance. And you mentioned like the soleus and the gastrocnemius. I'm sure people are familiar with the straight leg calf raises and bent knee calf raises and those kind of things. Randy Huntington, sprint coach, when he was on, talked about Su Bing Chan and the Kaiser, the air-powered soleus trainer that he used with Su to shore up weakness there. But I am curious your approach to the training the midfoot for strength and training the forefoot late stance for strength for athletic performance.
For the forefoot first, you can have a global exercise or MTP joint flexion from an isometric way. As I told you, if you want to increase the force within the forefoot, you have to have, I would say, yes, three conditions. Number one is the dorsiflexion of the tooth, as we mentioned. Number two is that you have an anteriorization of the force of application. So I'll say a forward lean that is pretty cool. And if you have forward lean plus number three, this is body overloading, you really have a good, I will say, overloading of the forefoot. So imagine an exercise where you have to have a maximal MTP joint flexion with body overloading, and you have this kind of forward lean. That's have increased the anteriorization of the center of pressure, and so increase the loading of the forefoot. And if, as I told you, the first ray is the big producer of the ray within the foot, so you can have also exercise dedicated to the first ray. But the first ray, it's, for some people, it could be very, very huge and very, very strong. So I don't believe in TheraBand for the first ray strength. So putting a TheraBand under your big toe and so on, I don't believe in that. So maybe what we told before, you can erase it with a first ray focus, but also using like a dancer elevation of the first ray, using, for example, a reverse leg extension, or use either have a load on your knee and just going on your first toe in the knee flex position, in sitting position, but have all the load on your knee, like I would say the same exercise that you can do with the soleus, for example, but you have an elevation with the toe, with the first ray. That could be also good exercise. On a third exercise could be also an isometric. It could be a feedback. If you have it, that could be cool also, because pushing with the first ray, and you can also, I would say, play on the tibia orientation. So you can push with the first ray in isometric ray with the tibia in dorsiflexion, or you can do it with during the final plantar flexion. So have an elevation of the heel on, I would say, a step and so on, and pushing after on the first ray on an isometric way. So yeah, we'll see for the forefoot will be that. The midfoot, if you want to work on the midfoot as a propulsor, I think one of the greatest exercise is what we mentioned before. So it raises with dorsiflexion because it's increased midfoot force production. And for an absorption and midfoot stabilization, I think that the first focus will be on tibialis anterior and tibialis posterior, but from an analytic way. And I use since 2 or 3 years ago now, shin bar. You put your ankle on your foot on the sock, and you can put some dumbbell and some weight on the foot that create an overloading, but you can do some dorsiflexion or inversion in not in closed chain, it's an open chain exercise.
Yeah, like when you have the weights attached to your foot and you're doing like dorsiflexion, or people colloquially or commonly known as tib raises. A lot of people, it's funny, that's gotten a bad rap because of the marketing in some ways, but I still use them. It's so you're saying for the midfoot, doing like the tibialis raises. Would you do that as an activation?
When you want, when your target is to have a stabilization of the forefoot, and in absorption focus. Yeah. And when you are in much more Midfoot focus for propulsion, the heel raises with the dorsiflexion on the tooth is a good one. And when you walk on this transition, between, I would say, eccentric, because the arch during stance have an eccentric, so lengthenings, and after recoil and shortening, but you have some kind of isometric between these two action within the Midfoot. And that's why I created, I would say that during the lockdown and the COVID pandemic, I was in the garden of my parent, and I just put, a book on my forefoot and a book on my rear foot and do some postural balance task and so on. And yeah, after just 1 minute, I say, wow, that's pretty hard for the Midfoot, because my body just between the two book and my force center of pressure within my foot is just unloading, but I have to be loaded by my foot. So that's what I call this exercise the foot bridge, which is putting a book on the forefoot and putting a book, it could be a book or something else, but and have an unloading Midfoot. So the Midfoot is not, I would say, not touch the ground at all. It's just the forefoot and the rear foot. And if you have some kind of body overloading and have a little bit of power lean, you have also some great isometric contraction of the Midfoot, which is good also for the transition. That's the foot encounter during stance phase, which is, I would say, lengthening and recoiling, but you have a little bit of isometric, which is pretty short, but that could be also good for this part of the stance. For absorption, propulsion, and isometric in the middle,
Yeah. So just to recap quickly here, so absorbing, so midfoot and absorbing, you have the bridge, like you mentioned, where there's a block under the toes or the forefoot, there's a block under the heel, so it's like a bridge. And you'd hold that isometrically. Like, would you do load? Like, I think, like, could you add like a bar or like pressing up or isometrics with that?
Yeah. It's much more iso-loading exercise. So all the an isometric loading, and what you want with your athletes in this exercise is that that you can perch on the arch.
Yeah,
you can perch on the arch on the exercise, and say that you don't want that they deform. You don't want that the Midfoot and the navicular, shut down. You want to be very strong and keep this position. And you have all, I will say, the center of pressure. It's right in the direction the Midfoot, which is unloading. So that's pretty, a good exercise. But this is for absorption, and after you have the analytic way to work on the absorber, so soleus, tibialis anteriors, and tibialis posterior.
Yeah, it's really interesting to just to look at what muscles are doing based off of the phase and the phase of support. I did, just to summarize too, the forefoot, the like the calf raises or the heel raises with dorsiflexion. You said that was more for the forefoot training, and I was even thinking about the last thing. I guess I'll just ask you, instead of me trying to summarize it, just we have a few minutes left, is like plyometric implications. Like, I think about like even hill sprinting up a hill. You naturally have the hill that's going to give more of a dorsiflexion of the toes impulse. You also see people training on like slant boards or things like that. Plyometrics on slant boards. Any thoughts with anything that's more dynamic in nature?
Yeah, and we only talk about max strength, but in terms of reactive strength, we know that the force within the foot is in 3D. And I really like, plyometrics and as you say, on different surfaces of inclined plate, inclined plate. Because if you want to target much more the pronation of the supination of the inversion of the eversion, that's pretty a good way to work also the plyometric and reactive strength of the foot in much more 3D. And yeah, for sure the dorsiflexion of the foot during this exercise, so increasing the dorsiflexion when you touch inclined plane, for example, that's pretty good also for the foot function for sure. So that's all that we can say so for this.
Yeah. In closing here, Romain, do you just want to, I think you mentioned your PhD research, and do you want to just mention anything about that or anything else you want to share with what's going on? And then we'll finish our chat for today.
So my PhD title is the role of the midfoot strength in propulsion kinetics in explosive tasks, so sprinting, cutting, and jumping. So my PhD was separated in 3 parts. The first part was to create an ergometer able to evaluate forefoot strength. So that was the first part that we created in Saint-Etienne with JB Morin. The second part was a much more cross-sectional study, where in elite athletes in 5 different sports, so track and field, rugby, soccer, handball, basketball, we wanted to know if athletes that have much more or greater forefoot strength have different force production capacity on the ground during explosive tasks. And what we found, and it's an article in submission now, what we found is that the greatest link between forefoot strength and kinetics was during maximal speed.
Interesting.
And we found that the association of forefoot strength and reactive strength, which was the ability of pogo, so the RSE reactive strength adduct during the pogo jump. If you have these two, I will say, quality, you will have what we show that we have a relation with the capacity to produce force in a vertical production at Vmax in less amount of time, so in less contact time. So the capacity, to have greatest force application in less amount of time in maximum speed. So that I would say that was pretty cool. Pretty cool because it's like we, a coach, track and field athlete, even you, even many, I would say, expert on the field said, the foot, if the foot and ankle, but the forefoot, it could be very, very important at max speed, and so on. So it was pretty fun to discover this. And the last part was a randomized control trial with forefoot strengthening. So we have at the third wave of inclusion, and what we found now, so that increase the forefoot strength could enhancing the overall performance in some performance. So what we found now, it's much more in cutting and much more in horizontal jumping. And the reason for this improvement, if we look at the ground reaction forces, it's so in cutting, it's because they have a greatest ratio of force. So the not greatest force production, but a greatest transmission of force. So the ability to have much more mediolateral, I will say, a ratio of force during cutting, also after foot strengthening. And for the horizontal jumping, it's much more in relation to the impulse, the horizontal impulse that they can create during jump. Because if you look at the forefoot, you have greatest forefoot strength, you can have greatest body forward lean, so you can have a greatest takeoff angle of your body. So that's a hypothesis or explanation of what we found. So that's this. And if we come back to max speed, we also saw some improvement of vertical force production at Vmax after forefoot strength. So that's what we currently found. So that's pretty cool because I would say that the idea of this PhD was to say, okay, if you just focus on the forefoot, on a strong perspective and enhancing the first waist strength and the forefoot strength and the empty pigeon strength, what is changing or what which changed the most from a force production perspective? And we found that, it's not in every task. You have some much more responder in some task and not for some other task and so on. So yeah, cutting, horizontal jumping, and Vmax. That's what, we will, I would say, demonstrate here in the future.
Yeah, it sounds like it'll be another conversation once the research is out, and it's got a lot of really cool implications. So, but thanks for sharing that. I know we're just about out of time here, but Romain, I really appreciate you coming on the show. It was great talking to you. And again, a topic that I absolutely love getting into with the foot. So thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Joel. What's a pleasure. And if you want another podcast and something else, don't hesitate. Thanks, man.
That finishes another podcast. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next week.